Morning, good afternoon, good evening.
And I have a question. Why does the U.S. want Africa to have permanent seats on the UN Security Council, but without veto power? Let's get to the bottom line. It's one of the most debated questions in the history of the United Nations. Why do only 5 countries have veto power over all decisions at the Security Council? For almost 80 years, they've been at the top of the food chain. China, France, Russia, the UK, and of course, the United States. The world has changed since then, but the UN Security Council has not. Decades ago, the P5, or the Permanent Five as they're called, decided to allow countries to join as rotating, non-permanent members with no veto. After all, the Security Council is the most powerful body at the UN, with the ability to impose sanctions and to authorize the use of force against countries. And now Washington is talking about creating permanent seats for 2 African nations, but get this, with no veto power. Why? And why now? Today we're talking with Adikana Chihombori Kwao, former ambassador of the African Union to the United States. Ambassador, it's terrific to have you back on our show. I want to start with a film clip of the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield. Let's listen.
As it stands, there are currently 3 non-permanent seats on the Security Council allocated to African countries on a rotating basis for 2 years. The problem is these elected seats don't enable African countries to deliver the full benefit of their knowledge and voices to the work of the Council, to consistently lead on the challenges that affect all of us and disproportionately affect Africa. That is why, in addition to non-permanent memberships for African countries, the United States supports creating 2 permanent seats for Africa on the Council. It's what our African partners seek, and we believe this is what is just.
Listen, there's a good chance somebody...
This is interesting. I think this raises a very important question. Two permanent seats with veto power. Well, let's look at Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, since the country's independence in 1980, has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. In other words, Zanu PF has denied the ordinary Zimbabwean a meaningful say in the governance of the country. The only time that Zimbabwe came close to holding free, fair, and credible elections was in 2008. And it was as a result of the work of the SADC members who had put the regime under enormous pressure to carry out some democratic changes to allow the people to have a meaningful say. In the March 2008 elections, it was clear that Zanu PF was losing those elections. What did Zanu PF do? Stepped in, brushed aside all the agreement they had made in terms of holding free, fair, and credible elections. And this is what Mnangagwa himself said, boasting about it.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose vatofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati atomamira zvakaita takatodini kateda sei manje mama tikati abvudzai baba ntaurira baba gadzirai politi bureau cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zvipi gadzirai chi cabinet asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 maresults abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country, we face a generational transition. Vana vese vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusuru. We know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We are going to act as we see it fit. We are prepared to go the whole distance.
That is the Zanu PF that emerged in 2008. SADC and the AU could not accept Zanu PF as the legitimate government, and they forced the regime to go into the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU of 2008 to 2013 was to implement the democratic reforms, to stop the blatant cheating and the wanton violence of 2008. Alas, not even one token reform was implemented. Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends, and the rest is history. Zanu PF was able to blatantly rig last year's elections because not even one reform was implemented. SADC and the AU election observers condemned those elections as flawed, but they could not go the extra mile and deny Zanu PF legitimacy because the opposition and their brain-dead supporters, 2 million of them, had participated in those elections. Last month, Mnangagwa took over the chairmanship of SADC. Many Zimbabweans out there objected to that. And many SADC leaders and ordinary SADC members objected to it too. Because they know that to have somebody like that, who is illegitimate in his own country, to be chairing the whole regional body is ridiculous. What more if Mnangagwa, if Zimbabwe was to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council with a veto? Bad enough just being a member, but to have a veto as well, that makes me sick. That should make anybody with any brain sick. If we are failing to govern Zimbabwe, can we seriously expect that we will play a meaningful role on the international stage having a veto over key decisions? I don't think so. We in Zimbabwe, Zanu PF has captured, corrupted all the state institutions. We are relying on SADC to help us come out of this mess. Now, if the same corrupt dictator is in charge of SADC, where else can we go? To the UN. And then we find the same dictator has got a veto in the UN as well. I think people should be careful what they wish for. And at the present moment, the prospect of a dictator like Mnangagwa having a veto, being chairman of SADC is bad enough. But for him to have a veto at the UN Security Council, Jesus Christ. Anyone who seriously think that will be good for the country is sick. We don't want dictators like him to start flexing such a muscle. The Security Council, the UN, is already dysfunctional because I think one of the problems they have had there is members like Russia and China, who, as far as Zimbabwe is concerned, have often backed Zimbabwe in over issues that were not in the interests of the ordinary Zimbabwean. It's bad enough that there's Russia and China there backing the regime. Can we imagine having to add more tyrants at the UN Security Council? It will only undermine that institution even more. I don't know about other countries, but I can speak with confidence that a country like Zimbabwe cannot and must not be a permanent member of the UN and be given the veto. That, to me, is an outrage. We need help to sort out our mess. At the present moment, we cannot rely on the Zimbabwe's own constitution and laws because Zanu PF has corrupted them all. We are having to rely on SADC. And with Mnangagwa as chairperson, at the present moment, we are snookered. The only other possible body that can help us is the UN. The prospect of having Mnangagwa a permanent member of the UN is unthinkable. It's completely unthinkable. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, and have a good evening.